is my favourite part of the job, is actually getting to drink whiskey with people, albeit not in person at the moment. But again, we're having a little chat as folk were coming in there, saying it's amazing that we can do this now virtually. And I think in the last year, I've probably spoken to more people around the world than ever before with this new wonderful virtual world which you live in. So as great as it is having in-person whiskey tastings, I hope these do continue as well, because it is great to be able to sit in your own room and get all around the world with this. But for me, I think it's always nice again to know who's talking to you. So my name is Matthew Cordiner. I'll say the recently appointed global brand ambassador for the company. I still feel like an absolute charlatan getting to call myself a global brand ambassador because I took on the role in March 2020. So I'm yet to leave pretty much my postcode with the job at the moment, let alone get around the world and drink whiskey with some people there. So it's been a bit of a strange year, but as I say, a great year getting to chat to a lot of people around the world with this virtual world which we now live in. I love these tastings to be as interactive as possible. So I know we can already see the chat box starting up in full flow there. So please, as we go throughout the tasting, I'd love to get your thoughts on all the whiskies. If you have any questions, I know is that Nikki is going to be keeping an eye on the chat box there and feeding them through. I said to her at the beginning when we joined, my mum always says I can blether for Scotland. I do talk an awful lot, so hopefully I'll have some pauses for questions in amongst all the banter as well. But there is nothing worse than joining a whiskey tasting and someone talking at you without having a dram in hand. So I think without further ado, let's crack open that first sample, get a little bit of chat going on about it, and then we'll chat all things whiskey. The focus for me, although I represent its Dewars, I very much am the global single malts ambassador. So really for me, it's anything single malts. And we have my counterpart who's the global Dewars ambassador. But that said, before I took on the global malts role, my job was based at the wonderful brand home which we have of Aberfeldy, which I saw Greg said he's visited there. Anyone who's ever visited, you'll know why I jumped at the chance to be the brand home's ambassador for Aberfeldy, because I'm very biased, of course, but I think it must be one of the most beautiful distilleries in Scotland. I should say I've been officially in the industry about 13 years now. For a long time, 9 years I worked with Chivas Brothers as well. Mainly started off with Glenlivet and the Brand Homes team before traveling the world as an ambassador. So I believe we do have some people in the club here maybe joining from South Africa. So I was based there for a year. I was based out in the States in Miami for a year as well. So it'd be great to hear whereabouts you guys all are coming from, because I'd love to get some chat about that going in the chat box as well. But I jumped at the chance. It all happened for me in Miami in week one. I ended up in a boxing ring in a distributor's warehouse representing Chivas Regal against Dewars in a boxing ring. So I know we have some big fans of Dewars here. And it was talking brand histories. And being a Scot, I honestly hadn't heard that much about Dewars. It's always really been an export brand. But leaving that boxing ring, I thought, wow, how have I never heard of this brand? And started to read up and do a bit of homework. And the ambassador was up against in the ring said, next time you're back in Scotland, you must visit Aberfeldy Distillery. So my long-suffering girlfriend who's not into whiskey, I always have to kind of play my cards right to get to stop at another distillery. So on a trip down from my home, which is Speyside, which I'll talk about in a minute, down to Edinburgh, I said, can we stop in, really quick visit Aberfeldy Distillery? 20 minutes tops, I promise. 4 hours later, we were still there. So that, for me, is the kind of place Aberfeldy is. And that'll be the dram that we're opening up with tonight. So if you have got that, sample number one is going to be our Aberfeldy 12. So as I say, pop that into a glass. There we go, a full size, Nick, I can see on screen, full size there. That's what I like to see. So pour yourself, as I say, your sample. I will say you don't have to pour all of your sample for this. I always think it's quite nice to hold a bit back, and maybe once we finish the tasting, coming back and kind of comparing them all side by side. So I always think just a little bit of a dram to start with. And as I say, it is your sample, so use them how you like. If it's been one of those Sundays and you're dreading a Monday morning, by all means, you feel free to enjoy the full sample. But I think there's no better place to start than Aberfeldy 12 years old. Whether you're a seasoned whiskey drinker or you're completely new to the game, this is my go-to dram, I think, for that. And as soon as you put that in the glass and you have a little smell, I'm not going to teach you how to drink whiskey because you're all in a whiskey club, so I'm sure you're all seasoned drinkers by now. Personally, I always like to have just a little smell, just a little taste, wet the lips, and then just add a couple of drops of water. But for me, one of the first things you notice on the nose there, or in fact, I want to get your thoughts first before I sway you with my words here and my own thoughts on the whiskey. I'd love to get any of your initial thoughts from that smell, or if you've had a little initial taste before adding some of that water. As I say, feel free to pop them in the chat box and have that on the side here as well.
I think it's very fruity.
Yeah, very fruity for me. Definitely a great note there. We're a fairly small bunch for now, so I say pop it in the chat box, or if you do want to come off mute just now and shout some things out at me as well, by all means, feel free. Peaches and cream, 100%, Nick, there as well. I definitely think it's got that really kind of ripe, kind of fruity note as well. But cream, I think there's a lovely kind of vanilla note, quite a creamy vanilla that sits alongside. And that's what I love about Aberfeldy. As soon as I say this Nick's note, you're not going to be able to escape it. But for me, it's honey. It's kind of this really kind of slightly kind of floral honeyed note that for me is the backbone of Aberfeldy. So we're trying the 12 just now, but in the core range, we have a 12, a 16-year-old and a 21-year-old. And then we have a huge variety of exceptional casks. I'll explain more about what that is later as well. One of them is going to be in the raffle, and I think it's one of my all-time favourite Aberfeldy. So it really is a great one that we're going to have a chat about later on. Typical maltiness, yeah. Some Ovaltine, 100%. I definitely think there's some big cereal notes kind of alongside that sort of sweet vanilla as well. Very typical of distillery house style. Couldn't agree more there as well. Caramel.
I think Andy's got it on the money. I like Andy's custard. I was thinking vanilla custard, like that. The creme brulee, when you go through to the creamy custardy bit.
It's that little kind of burnt sugary note on there as well. 100%, that kind of combination of the two. But great tasting notes there, guys, as well. So for me, I always think it's nice as you're sipping along and enjoying the whiskey now, I'll tell you just a little bit about the distillery and the history as well. And we'll maybe open up for if there's any questions on that distillery. But Aberfeldy, I think, one of the most beautiful distilleries in Scotland. I know I am biased saying that, but it's this beautiful old Victorian looking building, or part of it is anyway. There were expansions you're greeted with as you drive along the road. A 1968 kind of expansion with a lovely new still house, but the original part of the building still stands, which a lot of it is the malting floors, or was the malting floors, but is now a visitor centre. And it has a very sort of Victorian look, as it was a building started building in 1896, kind of up and running, we say established in 1898. And it was the man who is kind of said to be the architect, if you like, of the Scotch whisky industry. I'm going to put bonus points out tonight. They mean absolutely nothing in the scheme of things, other than imagine bragging rights within your whisky group here. But does anyone want to hazard a guess at the architect for the distillery? If you know one distillery architect in Scotch whisky, it's probably him. Because he's said to have built 56 of Scotland's distilleries, really a pioneer kind of within the Victorian era of distilling. He's a man who is based up in Elgin in Speyside, but people all over Scotland. Charles Doig, I think you've got it there, Greg. I'll give you that one. Very well done. So Charles Cree Doig, literally the man who is said to have built the Scotch whisky industry. And the reason that lots of people wanted him as an architect was in the early 1890s at Dalhousie. He pioneered this new special chimney on a kiln, which anyone who's been up to Speyside, you'll now kind of know as our symbol, if you like, on the tourist boards for the Scotch whisky industry. That lovely pagoda roof, right? That lovely Doig ventilator, the official name for it, that sits above your kiln. And that kind of is part of our story at Aberfeldy, because the builders of Aberfeldy were the two Dewars sons. So I mentioned we are very much tied. We are John Dewar and Sons as a whisky company under Bacardi as our head company. And really it all began, I suppose, with John Dewar himself, not far at all from Aberfeldy. In fact, it's one of the next villages along from Aberfeldy that must have one of the funniest village names in Scotland. It is a little 4-letter word. As I say, it's just a couple of villages along from Aberfeldy. Again, another bonus point. So, Greg, I think you got one in there already with Charles Doig. I say one of the best, I think, funniest village names in Scotland. A little 4-letter word. Any guesses here? This one's a bit more obscure. I'll be very impressed if anybody gets this one. Silence. As soon as I say it, you'll be, oh, I might have seen that in a newspaper, because it did get in the newspapers a few years ago. It is the village of Dull, literally Dull, this tiny little place. I don't want to get myself in trouble with the people of Dull, but I'm sure even they'd agree there's not a lot going on in Dull today, and I'm sure there was even less going on back in the 1800s when John Dewar was a kid and a teenager. I will say, though, the people of Dull have a great sense of humour, because the first thing you see when you drive into the little village of Dull, it's more of a hamlet, I think, than a village, is "Welcome to Dull," and it's twinned with a little town in Oregon in the United States called Boring. So Dull and Boring have become friends. And it gets even better, because there's a little place in, I think, Western Australia called Bland, who've now jumped on as well. So there's an official relationship between the villages of Dull, Boring and Bland. And a pub quiz fun fact, it's known as the Trinity of Tedium, which just makes me laugh. As I say, it's great to see these people in the council have a good sense of humour. Really, that is,
Matthew, just to let you know the level of where our kind of club is, the one answer to that was Lee, and he said it was called Twat. So that tells you the level of.
I mean, Twat is.
That's twinned with.
It is another coast village. I think Twat's in Orkney. I think that's one of the Orkney towns, isn't it, as well? And there's quite a few Twats on Orkney, literally as a surname as well. So you're close. I'll give you that. It's another very good Scottish village name. Also 4 letters there. So very well done for that one. But that's you guys are my kind of level here. We're going to get on very well tonight, I think. With the banter. So say Dull, Boring and Bland, we say the least dull thing to come from Dull was our founder, John Dewar. And in his early 20s, he decided, Dull is pretty dull, get me out of here. And he went over to join an auntie and uncle's wine and spirit shop in Perth. And he worked with them for almost another sort of 20 years. And by the time he turned 40, he decided, I've got enough experience in the industry, I know what I'm doing. And he started up his own wines and spirits shop there. So 1845 it would be that we say Dewar's was founded as a company. But the father, John Dewar, he left this amazing legacy for his children, and 2 of his children, John Alexander, really his kind of father's son, really thinking a lot about production, and the youngest of the children, there was 10 of them in total, and this was before Netflix was invented. So as I say, not much else to do, big family. Tommy Dewar was this really out-the-box kind of character, and we'll talk about him in a little minute. But the 2 sons were left this legacy after their father died in 1880. And Dewar's was really starting to expand as a blended whiskey, but the problem was they didn't own any of their own distilleries. So the 2 sons took on the decision, we need to build our own distillery. We need something to be the heart, kind of to safeguard the Dewar's blend. And so they built Aberfeldy Distillery. And they wanted something that was sweet, easy, light going, kind of to be the heart of this blend. Hence why they got Charles Doig in with his lovely new invention, the Doig ventilator, which meant even if you're using peat or a combination of coke, we called it, kind of coal and peat, you could get this light kind of character coming through. That what the Doig ventilator did was it acted a bit like your kind of flue on your, like if you've got a chimney or something where you open the air vent, you get this massive suck through of all the smoke. And it meant you could use these things like coal and peat. Scots were very thrifty with their money, shall we say. We use what's lying close by to us. There was a lot of peat lying around. So we used it not because we wanted a smoky taste, but through necessity, maybe more than anything else. One of my good friends, an Irish whiskey ambassador, once said to me, do you know how copper wire was invented? And I said, no. And he said it was 2 Scotsmen fighting over a penny. They'd stretched out so much, right? We're known to be quite tight with our money up this way. So this was it really, we used it because it was there, not because we wanted a smoky taste. But by using that special chimney, it allowed a lot of ventilation to come through. What was that, Frank?
Sorry, that was the Dutch. Running about a cent, I know.
You guys I think we're pretty similar, right?
Yes, they are.
But so this special chimney allowed them to achieve that really light kind of honeyed character. And, originally Aberfeldy was not thought of to be bottled as a single malt. They really were thinking of it as being the heart kind of malt of the Dewar's blend. And for many, many years, that's kind of the role it played. But over the years, we fell under the company. the John Dewar and Sons in 1925 became part of the DCL, the Distillery Company Limited. And over the years, of course, the Distillery Company Limited grew, and in 1996, with the final merger with Grand Metropolitan, became known as Diageo, as we know it today. But they were told they had too many distilleries, basically a monopoly across Scotland. It was against trading standards with the SWA, so they had to sell off a proportion of their portfolio. So the John Dewar and Sons portfolio was sold in 1998 to Bacardi, which is still the head owners today. So yeah, an interesting, as I say, history there, but really it was only under DCL. There was a few bottles, as Flora and Fauna, which Diageo did a few of, kind of independent, small bottlings and Flora and Fauna of Aberfeldy. But it wasn't really till Bacardi took over that we saw this kind of standard core range appearing. And that was only actually in 2014. And we launched it under what we call the Last Great Malts, was kind of this collective name for all the single malts being launched. And actually all the whiskies you're tasting tonight really were launched in 2014. So we're going to have some lovely old distillery, dates and names and things like this. 1812 we date back to with Royal Brackla, but the majority of them really started to see it being bottled after kind of 2014 onwards. I'm seeing the place, Greg saying, please say hi for me to Richard Devon, my guide was at Aberfeldy, and to Ross Dennis, two of my really good pals, so I will definitely be saying hello to them, Richard, don't you worry at all. M&M have this for £34.95. That around sort of 36 pounds, I think, is the sort of going price for Aberfeldy 12. Back to the whiskey again. I've got a little bit of an interlude there with some of the history there and kind of why it exists. But again, I'd love to get some more of those kind of tasting notes coming through. A drop of water dials us up. Yeah, if you haven't already, I definitely encourage you just to add a couple of drops of water. And I think that sweetness really opens up. You sometimes, for me, with a bit of water, get just a wisp of smoke in there. Just really a light kind of wisp of smoke. I want to be clear here, we use a plain malt. So none of that smokiness comes from the peating at all. What we use at the distillery. We do get, Stephanie says, our malt master says, a little bit of that smokiness usually comes from the casks that she's used. Some of the casks who come from, have holding peaty whiskey before and things like that. But there's just that lovely little wisp at the back it has as well. But for me, above anything else, honey, big fruits. We talked about a lot of those kind of ripe fruits coming through. A little bit of toffee and caramel in there too. We're using a combination of ex-bourbon and ex-sherry casks here. And it's a combination of some first fill and some refill. And we call it refill and then rechar, kind of a rejuvenated casks that we have at the end of a life. Again, we'll do a kind of thin sort of, again, filing down and again, kind of rechar for the casks as well. More honey and a bit of spice. Yeah, I think there's just a lovely kind of soft spice coming through there as well. Again, regret it's not bottled at 43 in non-chill filtered. It's one of these things, I think, for Aberfeldy, for us at the moment, we want it to be a really accessible whiskey. Some of our exceptional cask range you will find bottled at higher ABV, and I definitely think it's interesting. But for me with Aberfeldy, it's just trying to make it as accessible for people all around the world and get it out there kind of as our flagship malt. So our malt master thinks 40% is great for that. I do think it's great if you're a connoisseur of whiskey as well. A lot of people who I know really who love their whiskey in big collections, they still really rate Aberfeldy. But for me, the job of Aberfeldy is getting people into whiskey, getting people into drinking single malts. And I think it's so good at doing that job. We're talking a little bit adding water, and it just made me think something I do have to talk about. The nickname we have for Aberfeldy is the Golden Dram. And that comes from, again, if you visited us on site, you might have seen this lovely little water source that runs past the distillery. And with this lovely little cascading waterfall, which is really off of our cooling water sort of reservoir, if you like. But that is part of what we call the Petillie Burn. And the Petillie Burn is this lovely flow of water that's coming down from the hills around us. And Aberfeldy historically was known to having the hills coming down from the Birks of Aberfeldy, this lovely water source that Rabbie Burns wrote poems about. There were seams of gold in the hills. A lot of this gold over the years has been washed down through the hillside and out into the water, which we call alluvial gold. So gold kind of shaped by water. And washed down through this lovely Petillie Burn. So historically, it was known as this great place to go gold panning. That said, if you bring if you visit Aberfeldy, there's probably not much point in bringing the welly boots now, as it's very rare to find a bit of gold in there. But back in 2018, the biggest gold nugget in the history of the United Kingdom. All it said was it was found in Perthshire waters, but local sources say it was pretty close to the distillery for us as well. So it might be worth bringing the welly boots after all. But to say, quite a rarity to find those gold nuggets today. But that is where that history and that name comes from, the golden dram, which we have with Aberfeldy. And can we say it almost as a forest distillery? It really is literally, it's surrounded by trees, the Birks of Aberfeldy again, and we have red squirrel forest. Again, you used to see on the old bottles this lovely red squirrel kind of on the lid of an Aberfeldy. Again, that's one of the forests that kind of surrounds us. But again, I'm totally biased, but if you're ever up in Scotland, it's one of the main roads kind of, you know, passing up, if you are heading up towards Speyside, the A9, it's a little kind of 20-minute detour, you know, from Ballinluig, and you're in one of the most beautiful distilleries in Scotland. So definitely recommend stopping in if you ever get the chance. I've probably talked enough, looking at the time already. As I say, I can blether a fair bit, but I want to open it up to you guys now. Are there any questions at all just on Aberfeldy as a dram or as a distillery, or any questions on the history?
Matthew, is this the cheapest bottle you do?
The Devon, you can find it's very kind of price comparable with the Devon 12. Sometimes the Devon 12 will be a little bit lower. We've actually just kind of launched the Devon. We didn't really have a kind of supermarket whiskey. I'd say, you know, something you'd find on your shelves. Someone could kind of put in a good volumes at a really good price in a supermarket. In the last literally week while I've been on holiday, I think that one started to make its way into some supermarkets. I think maybe Tesco, it might be one there. So I think that's going to come in at a little bit lower now, a really, really good price point. I think someone said that. They're same for the Devon, by the way. You know, it works kind of being that kind of entry, I think, into the world of whiskey. For me, the Devon's great at that. We'll save that till a bit later on when we talk about the Devon as a whiskey. But yeah, I think the Devon probably is just a little bit less now. But Aberfeldy, I think, yeah, a couple of pounds more, about £36, I think, as I say, thereabouts. Sometimes you did get it on offer, you know, occasionally in supermarkets. But we've literally everything we have, we are getting out at the moment. So it's one we have to be careful. We don't want to cut our price down too much because it's quite still rare to find it bottled as a single malt in the scheme of things with what we put into blends and that. So we're selling literally everything we have as a single malt. So we don't really think there's a need for price discount, if I'm honest. You know, it's one we'd quite like to keep the price a bit higher. So yeah, you're getting at a good price just now. I'll say at 36.
Matthew, how popular is the Aberfeldy outside of the UK? Is it exported a lot?
Growing, definitely exporting for us at the moment. Again, to put it into the perspective, John Dewar and Sons as a company, kind of the kind of whiskey arm of Bacardi, are very much a blended whiskey company, right? They are, Dewar's, of course, is the number one selling blended Scotch whiskey in the US at the moment, and one of the top selling around the world. And we also have something called I've just been on holiday for 10 days. I can't believe I'm blanking on this one. It'll come back to me in a minute. One of the best-selling whiskies in Russia. What on earth is it? William Lawson's, that's the word I'm looking for. One in the continent you guys might have seen. But again, one in the UK. Until I joined Bacardi, never heard of William Lawson's. I think it might be at the moment, if not the number one selling whiskey in Russia, one of the top selling whiskies in Russia. Absolutely booming just now. We were sponsoring the football over there a couple of years ago. We sponsored the biggest party in Russia for New Year's, and literally looking at some of the shots on the TV, you just saw William Lawson's plastered absolutely everywhere. So it's this huge, again, blended whiskey that we just never hear of in the UK. Definitely worth a try if you ever see it. But my point here is, you know, John Dewar and Sons, up until now, very much a blended whiskey company. And that kind of 2014, we launched that last great malts, but it really was kind of a portfolio play, you know, something thinking about them all under one name. In the last couple of years, I'd say since maybe sort of 2016, 2017, we started to really focus on all of our single malts as kind of brands within their own right. And with that, Aberfeldy has kind of been that flagship for us. So to answer your question, Nick, it's starting to boom in the States. It's becoming a really big player for us in the US. Again, across Europe, it's definitely starting to get some traction. As a whiskey, you'll see it a lot in France, Germany, another big market for us. I should say North America, not just the States. It is Canada, again, is a growing concern for us as well. But across China, again, really becoming a really big market for us. And that's probably in the older age statements. I will say pretty much our exceptional cask kind of releases we have, where we get our kind of old and rare. For this year, China has got the dog's lot. I think they've got the majority, because they are snapping them up, at kind of whiskies at the kind of 20, 30, 40, almost even 45, 50-year-old kind of mark for some of the things we're releasing across our portfolio. So if you like our whiskies, it might be worth a trip to China, because you're going to find a lot of exceptional and rare casks there. Maybe leave it for a bit, mind, but yeah, down the line, one place to go for sure. But hopefully that answered the question there, Nick. As I say, a roundabout way of answering, but hopefully I've answered more questions and a bit more of the history and things.
Yes, I'm now going to China. So that's good. Thanks very much.
Definitely on my list of places to go for sure. I mean, as a whiskey market goes, is one of, I think, the most interesting markets in the world at the moment. You might have heard of Whiskey Live. It's this kind of obviously a festival that happens in various countries. They have Whiskey L there. Someone kind of bought it over, and I think it must be the biggest whiskey festival in the world out there just now. And the photos I've seen look like absolute madness. It looks like a great laugh, but everyone I know who comes back says you have to sit in a dark room for a week. It's kind of pretty full on. A lot of Kampai and all this. They drink it pretty fast. Selling a lot of Johnny Walker, Blue Label in China again. They love, the prestige definitely sells out there for sure. They do drink whiskey in Russia, a lot of vodka as well, but whiskey is booming out there for us at the moment. It's definitely a growing, there was a BRIC markets, I think they called it, Brazil, Russia, India, China, for a long time were considered the kind of growing markets in whiskey. We're probably going back 5 years ago now. It definitely has changed the acronyms since then as well. But there we go. So that, I think that's Aberfeld, as I say, a great place to start tonight, but we probably should move on to try something else. So whiskey number 2 of the evening we're going to have is Altmore 12. So to whoever said they'd like a slightly stronger whiskey, non-chill filtered, we're about to appease you, hopefully, because we're moving on to Altmore 12, which is 46% ABV, natural colour, non-chill filtered. This is us getting into more of the kind of whiskey specialist kind of territory, I think. Altmore, again, I want you to start having a little taste of this, have a little sip, have a little smell, have a little taste. I'd love to start seeing your thoughts kind of coming up in the chat box there. But as you're enjoying this, let me start telling you a little bit about the history of Altmore, and then we'll dive into some thoughts on the tasting notes and questions as well. Altmore is this hidden gem in Speyside. As I say, I'm from Speyside, not Altmore. Actually, the last whiskey we're going to be talking about this evening, Craigellachie, is my hometown, and I usually leave it to last because however much time we've got left in a tasting, I will definitely need it, if not more. So it's always one to leave for the end, and also for the flavour profile, as we'll see very shortly with Craigellachie. But Altmore, I thought, was the next kind of whiskey to move on to, as although it's at 46% ABV, it has such a fresh, kind of grassy, green, floral, again, lovely kind of ripe fruity notes coming through here as well. And I think it must be one of the best kept secrets in Speyside. Altmore itself is this tiny little village, it's a scattering of houses, but this real hidden gem in Speyside. And I was doing a lot of work with the head of archives, looking back at some of our archive documents and some of the stories that are collected over the years. And, Altmore goes way back in the 1800s. It was this area rife with illicit distillers, illegal whiskey makers. And, we've had lots of families who've lived there for generations, and the stories were kind of passed down over the years. And they were recorded in the DCL Gazette when it was under the Distillery Company Limited. And there was this great story about one of the signals they had. It was known as the White Cloth. And we strap, again, I know Nick had the bottle there, I think, in somewhere, and you'll see kind of on the packaging, on the bottle, and then the outer packaging, we kind of shroud it in white. We kind of cloak Altmore in white. And for me, a lot of that relates back to this lovely illicit history, which we used to have. And there was this local signal known as the White Cloth. And there was only really kind of one road into Altmore. It was kind of, one road in, one road out kind of thing, tiny little village. And anytime the locals spotted a stranger, they assumed it was a gauger, a taxman. And it was time to warn, all these little illicit whiskey makers kind of hiding around the outskirts of the village in what was known as the Foggy Moss. Now, I remember we had this great, someone came up from the London marketing team and asked one of the stillmen, why is it called the Foggy Moss? And he said, well, It's usually covered in fog and there's quite a lot of moss. You know, we name things how we see them in Scotland. You know, there's not much to the imagination there. And it is around the distillery building, you have just this loads of, you know, big kind of green, lush kind of moss. Again, it's surrounded by water, really, and a really good indicator of water. Altmore itself, I don't speak Gaelic, but I've been looking up some of the translation for distillery names. And Altmore would literally translate as big burn. So again, a burn in Scotland, that body of water. So you're rife with all this lovely water flowing through the ground around Altmore. So you had lots of water. We had a lot of barley. Again, that whole area, Moray, you know, part of Speyside, really, the official kind of name, council region would be kind of Moray. And we are known for growing some of the best quality barley in Scotland. Again, perfect spring barley for use for making whiskey. So we had everything kind of going for us with the locals. So again, it was rife with these kind of legal whiskey makers. And again, it was really easy to hide away in all this fog and moss. But when there was a white cloth went up, it sat on the peat stack at the side of the village. When they covered the peat stack with a big white cloth, it was time to hide away all your small stills, get them smuggled away back into the hillside and come back to the village. So way before our distillery was built, you know, there was this lovely history with whiskey making in Altmore. But quite a few years later, we built Altmore Distillery, and it was in 1897. Altmore was built. They started building in 1896, up and running in 1897. And again, the architect, you've probably guessed it here, our good old friend, Charles Doig. Again, one of the best known as the architects in the whiskey industry. To put it into perspective, I think the next biggest architect in the industry built 6 distilleries, and he built 56. So as I say, he really was the architect of the Scotch whiskey industry, especially for that kind of period in time. Our founder for Altmore, again, himself, if you know, Altmore was one of the best kept secrets in Speyside. I think our founder really is this forgotten hero within Scotch whiskey making. I'll be very impressed if anybody again knows his name. He had a lot of distilleries under his name. I'm going to rifle a few of the distilleries off, which might help you out here. So the first ever distillery he would build along with a business partner was our Craigellachie. Second distillery was Ben Rinnes, which he'd inherit from his father, David. Then after that, a few years later, he would build Altmore. Within the same year, he'd take out a lease on Oban Distillery. And then he'd move from Craigellachie, where he was based, out to Forres, where he'd build 2 other distilleries. Dallas Moor, as it was originally known, but later known as Dallas Dew, which is now closed today. And also Ben Romich, today owned by Gordon MacPhail. So a huge number of distilleries under his name. Very important for the whiskey blenders, but nobody really knows his name. So I'll be, as I say, I'll be unbelievably impressed if anybody knew it. I've not seen it in the chat box yet, so I'll tell you. Oh, there we go. Nick, very well done there. Alexander Edward. Really is this forgotten whiskey hero. We have the Spirit of Speyside Whiskey Festival up in the villages, and Dave Broom, who you might have heard of, a very well-known whiskey writer, along with Lindsay Gray, who used to run the Quake Bar in the village, did this great talk about Alexander Edward, and it's amazing the impact he has had on the whiskey industry over the years. Really, he was thinking about the blenders, though, as a businessman, and he was really good friends with Tommy Dewar, as I mentioned, one of our founders within the Dewar's whiskey side. Peter Mackey, who was his business partner, known for Whitehorse blended whiskey, and his business partner with Craigellachie. He did go into business with the Pattisons. You might have heard of the Pattisons crash. So not the best business partners to have in Altmore in the early days, but again, a lot of people really, big names in whiskey, who were known as blenders. But unlike the blenders, he kind of shied away from the limelight a bit. And I think the deed itself was good enough for him, but really known as this local philanthropist, really great guy by all accounts, gave up his large luxury manor houses for pop-up hospitals in the Second World War, gave away a huge estate in the Highlands known as Kintail to the hospital again, the Royal Northern Infirmary. When Russian barley was flooding the market and farmers were struggling with pricing, he set up a fighting fund for farmers, loads of things. Again, just gave his money away left, right and centre, a lot for charity and for kind of notable causes. So really nice guy by all accounts. But again, really quiet, kind of, as I say, kind of in the background, just getting on with making great whiskey. And I think that's exactly what he did here with Altmore, because when they built Altmore in 1897, originally produced 50,000 gallons a year, which was already quite a sizable distillery for its time. But we did a lot of work with Dave Broom and Charlie McLean on our history there, again, 2 quite renowned whiskey writers. And they said within the first year of Altmore being built, the quality of the new make spirit proved so popular with blenders and with whiskey drinkers that the distillery doubled its capacity within 1 year up to 100,000 gallons. And we don't think any other distillery in history has proved so popular within its first year to kind of expand on that kind of scale. And Altmore has really been at that, again, one of the kind of backbones of blends across history, and it still is today. Very little relatively of Altmore gets bottled as a single malt. And historically, it was one of these kind of malt spotters. You know, I always say you get your train spotters, you have your malt spotters, you know, those guys writing down cask numbers and all these kind of really special, you know, private bottlings and kind of independent bottlings. Altmore has always kind of had that cult status, kind of cult following. But I think since we launched it under the Last Great Malts at the end of 2014, it's kind of grown, I think, amongst people who really know their kind of whiskies. It's one of those kind of hidden gems within Speyside. It's always been a bit of a local favourite, and it was always known as a nip of the Buckie Road was the nickname for it. If you were in the know, that's what you would ask for, was a nip of the Buckie Road, because for a long time the distillery didn't even really have its name clearly written from the road or on the distillery, and the locals knew it sitting on the 9-mile road out to Buckie from Keith to Buckie. So it was always locally known as, I'll have a nip of the Buckie Road, because that was kind of what they knew the distillery as. So you do sometimes see it referred to that on old bar menus and things as well. But lots of great stories, but say a local favourite, so much so. One of our big points for pride in the Speyside area is the Spirit of Speyside Whisky competition, which is always really kind of local bragging rights if you can do well in that competition. Our Altmore 21 ended up head-to-head in the final against the Glenlivet 21 in the last physical festival in 2019, and we were very much the underdogs going into that. But I'm pleased to say we came out, we pipped them at the post and took out best dram in the Spirit of Speyside Whisky competition in 2019, which is the last one that's taken place so far. And that was made up with local experts and world-renowned experts, and then in the final, people who were just taking part in the festival got to judge as well alongside the main judging panel. So again, it was a public and judging panel vote in the end, and it took overall best dram. So hopefully you guys, I'm seeing lots of lovely kind of nice things saying, you know, first dram here, very nice drop, and I really like this and enjoying my first Altmore. Again, I think it's, you know, it's a crowd pleaser. It's just an absolutely great dram. Follows on nicely, I think, from Aberfeldy. Slightly, you know, bigger shoulders with the ABV, but still very easy going, right? I think most people wouldn't have thought it was kind of up at 46%. But that, for me, is what made it so popular amongst the whiskey blenders early on. And it was always described as a top dresser. You know, something you could add just a little bit of to a blend, and it really improved the quality quite quickly of the blend. And the DCL used to publish something called kind of like their blending records, where they would rank whiskies all across Scotland, not just their own, but for their importance within blends. And they'd have top class, first class, second class, third class, fourth class. And top class was always just a list of 12 whiskies from around Scotland, and Altmore always featured in that list. If you have got a copy of Charlie MacLean's Whisky Miscellaneous, it's in the appendix at the back. There's this lovely big chart on it, and you can see all 12 of those kind of ranked top class were from Speyside. I think that area, again, it just really helped to improve the quality of the blends. But you'll see there in the nose, it just has that lovely freshness. For me, it's kind of that cut grass, kind of really green, kind of sharp green apples in there as well. And it kind of develops as you have a taste. People say melon quite a lot across the Altmore range, but a little bit of a spice kind of to it as well. I think just at that kind of higher ABV, you're getting a lovely kind of spicy note coming through there as well. But I'd love to see a thumbs up if you quite enjoyed that one on screen for who I can see. Yeah, it's been pretty much all round a good thumbs up there. But yeah, I think quite different Aberfeldy and Altmore. And, you know, we don't have any peaty whiskies. People say, oh, how would you differentiate between your whiskies? You've not got any kind of whiskies from Islay or anything within the range. You know, you're all kind of Highland or Speyside pretty much within our portfolio. But I think every one of the whiskies you're going to taste tonight has a really kind of different character coming through. So that's why I love doing this kind of tasting all kind of side by side. I think that's one of the best things about doing a tasting like this, is hopefully if you have enough glasses and you can kind of go back and compare. If you go back to that Aberfeldy, I think that sweet honey note now just really comes out to the fore after having something like that kind of green grassy, slightly kind of spicy note within the Altmore there as well. But yeah, really important, as I say, across the history of blends, but one of the best kept secrets for me within Speyside. Got a small hint of smoke on the Aberfeldy. I think it's one, the longer you leave it in the glass, that kind of wisp of smoke I maybe talked about there just comes through a little bit more. How does the 12-year-old compare to the 18-year-old? Haven't tried it in a long time. Yeah, so across the whole range of Altmore, we use, again, our malt master's kind of favourite general combination is a mix of first fill and refill bourbon and sherry. And that is what we have kind of across the range of Altmore. With the 18, they definitely dial up the use of sherry casks. And you can usually, if you hold them side by side, you'll see it's a good bit darker, and it's all natural colour within Altmore. Altmore and Craigellachie for us, and we leave, as I say, natural colour, non-chill filtered, and 46% ABV for that. I'm sure you guys might have heard this with, why is it at 46%? If whiskey is non-chill filtered, you have your fatty acid esters, which are, a lot of them are normally held back with chill filtration that can cause kind of a fogginess, a cloudiness, a flocculation is the technical word, if it was to experience kind of extremes in temperature. If you bottle it 46% or above, it can be non-chill filtered and it's not going to go cloudy just sitting in the bottle on a shelf. That said, if you've added a couple of drops of water to your Altmore and you leave it sitting in a glass, for maybe 5-10 minutes, you're going to see this lovely kind of cloudiness come through. I always say that's not a bad thing. It's just because it's non-chill filtered. For me, the mouthfeel, I love a non-chill filtered whiskey like this in at 46% because it really coats the mouth and it is a very different kind of mouthfeel. I don't think one is better than the other. I think it depends on the distillery and the whiskey, but I think it's definitely a nice something else to move on to there after the Aberfeldy. But Aberfeldy, a bit too sweet from a palate. Yeah, interesting to try at higher ABV. Definitely, Tom, I'd say if the 12 wasn't for you as is, and I definitely say it's not for everyone, try some of our exceptional cask Aberfeldy where we get up to that higher strength. Or yeah, Greg's got there one of our, that's cask strength. As a, what was that? Was that the 2001 or was that 1998? Which cask was it there, Greg? You can type it into the chat there or give us a shout. Which year was that you got that? I'm peering into it there. Oh, 1999. There we go. Great single cask there from Aberfeldy Distillery. So that's one of the hand fills. You get to take it out yourself and bottle it, but great fun. Without further ado, I think time for another whiskey. We'll move swiftly on to keep us to some sort of time this evening. We're going to go on to Royal Bracla next. So Royal Bracla, our oldest distillery within the John Dewar and Sons portfolio, and we date back to 1812 with this one. So a really rather old distillery, and you get a lot of whiskies, beginning, I guess, in the sort of after the 1823, Excise Act, that change in whiskey legislation that brought the price down and made it more affordable to get your license. And then whiskey really exploded around the sort of Speyside area. A lot of the probably biggest names in Speyside got their license in 1824 or not that far after. We're older than that as a legally licensed distillery, let's say 1812. And that was quite a brave thing to do back then because we were surrounded by illicit whiskey makers up there. We are not far, Inverness, probably the closest major place you'll know if you're not too familiar with Scotland. Those a little bit more familiar with Scotland, again, a few miles on from Inverness, along that kind of northeast shoulder, you have Nairn. And then just a couple of miles from Nairn, you have the tiny village. Again, it's a struggle, I think, even to call it a village. It's a scattering of houses again around the distillery, and that is Bracla itself. Love the distillery, Royal Bracla, but one I have an indie bottling of. Yeah, really, there's a lot of great indie bottlings, I will say, for Royal Bracla. That is definitely one I usually spot in some independent whiskey bars around Scotland, and some absolutely cracking drams of all different ages. I've had some great even 8-year-old Royal Bracla as well. But for me, the first thing you'll see on the nose with Royal Bracla is this. Stephanie describes it, our malt master for all our lovely single malt and master blender for Dewars, Stephanie McLeod. She is multi-award winning master blender. She's won Master Blender of the Year from some of the biggest awarding bodies across the last couple of years. And I think it's because she's just really reached this new kind of height in her game, a lot to do with finishing. And we can talk about that towards the end of the tasting as well. But something she's been doing lots with recently is Royal Bracla. And you've actually got some of the last bottles of what we now would call the old Royal Bracla, as we were just about to launch in the UK, and I think later in this month, a new Royal Bracla. But for me, the old Royal Bracla, it's 40% ABV again across the range here, and everything across the 12, the 16, and the 21, which were kind of old core range, is finished in Oloroso sherry casks. And Stephanie said, Royal Bracla and sherry are best friends, because the new make spirit, what leaves the distillery, has this lovely clean acidity that can really fight against some big heavy dominant flavors like sherry. It holds its own. And for me, it's this real balance. And she said it's like summer breeze, it's like a summer breeze in a glass with Royal Bracla. Again, lovely kind of big kind of flowery bouquets, along with lovely kind of rich ripe fruits. But you get a little bit of that spiciness and kind of those kind of dried kind of Christmas cakey notes coming through, from the use of the Oloroso sherry cask there as well. It's a wonderful whiskey. So again, I see with two fruits, darker fruits. Little vanilla in there again. We still have that use of kind of ex-bourbon and ex-sherry casks in that kind of initial maturation. But whether it was ex-bourbon or ex-sherry, we're finishing all of that for a period of roughly kind of 6 months in Oloroso sherry cask as well. Again, I think really kind of heightens that lovely kind of soft spice and Christmas cakey and kind of chocolate notes coming through. Christmas cake, definitely. Jammy fruits, definitely. Jammy fruits for sure. It's kind of sticky, kind of ripe kind of fruits coming through there as well. For me, usually when you think of Christmas cakey kind of notes, it usually is because there's some Oloroso kind of sherry casks in there as well. And the old range, what you're tasting at the moment, that range is finished across Oloroso sherry. I will talk a little bit to the new range that, as I say, is just about to be launched in the UK. We've taken the whole range in line with Altmore and Craigellachie, up to 46% ABV. It's now all natural colour, non-chill filtered. And we thought this was a great start, and I really do love what you're tasting just now. I keep calling it the old 12 because it has launched in markets like Taiwan, and I've been talking a lot with them as the new Royal Bracla. So as I say, this is the current Royal Bracla for the UK for this week, but give it another couple of weeks and you'll have a new range coming. But it's become a real exploration of sherry cask finishing. So for the new 12-year-old, as I say, we've moved up to 46%, non-chill filtered, and again, it's finished in Oloroso sherry, but we've gone from a 16-year-old to an 18-year-old in the new range, which is finished in Palo Cortado, which for me is one of the most interesting cask finishes you'll get, or interesting casks to use. It's known in amongst the sherry world as the winemaker's choice, and it's when a Fino kind of goes a bit funny during the kind of maturation period, the yeast, the flora in it, without going into too much of the chemistry and technicalities of sherry today, it naturally dies and you get these really musty, kind of grindy, funky notes coming through. It makes a really interesting cask for using. That's where our 18-year-old's finished in. And then our 21-year-old is finished in a sherry trinity of Oloroso, Palo Cortado, and Pedro Jimenez PX casks. And it just won at the World Whisky Awards Best Highland Single Malt Whisky. And it just won a double gold. The whole new range for us with Royal Bracla won double gold at the San Francisco Spirit Awards, which just happened last month when the results came out. And that means every single person on the panel gave it a gold. So it gets a second gold for that. We're one of the only, I think, full ranges to get that, and one of the only few awarded double gold. So Royal Bracla, I think, is definitely one to watch. That said, we're about to move into this new range of Royal Bracla. So what you're tasting just now is going to become quite hard to get hold of the lovely old bottles. So I think if Royal Bracla, as I say, is one that we're putting a lot of time and effort into with their new range, it might be worth getting hold of one of these old bottles, because who knows what the range is going to do down the years. But that would be my shout anyway. But fantastic whiskey. I think we're a Highland whiskey. I think we're not afraid of a little bit of a spice kind of in there as well. But yeah, I'd love to get some of your thoughts and notes on the whiskey here as well.
Nick,
smooth out the spice.
Nick, how much is left in the bottle, mate, that you've got? I feel another raffle coming on. Nowhere near enough.
tell you what, these are the heaviest bottles as well. I don't know if you put more glass in, Matthew, than anybody else, but I think the bottle's worth £5 by itself. So raffle that if you want.
It's got that lovely, I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's in wine. You get that lovely bit at the bottom to help you pour. So the thumb kind of goes in, kind of in line with, say a lot of wine cask finishing, sherry cask finishing. I think it's just a beautiful bottle. I should explain as well, we are the village of Brackla, but we are known as Royal Brackla. And it's whiskey fit for a king, I would say here. And going back a little bit with the story, it was a man called William Fraser who started our distillery. He was actually known by that time as starting as Captain William Fraser after his time in the military. But he was a local man to Brackla, had grown up as the son of a tenant farmer. So again, they leased their farm from the local estate, which was the estate of Cawdor, so Cawdor Castle. Any thespians amongst you, any fans of Shakespeare, might have heard the name Cawdor before, because of course you have the Thane of Cawdor in Shakespeare's Macbeth. So it's that kind of lovely, kind of storied landscape you can imagine, as I say, getting featured in Shakespeare there. But it's this lovely storied history we have with the distillery as well. So he came back from his time in military service, now a decorated soldier, as I say, Captain William Fraser. And leaving from the military, he wanted to take on the lease off his father's farm, which I think was something like 500 hectares. It was a really big kind of estate. And as I say, we were known as some of the best quality barley in Scotland. So he had an abundance of barley, had his water, had his yeast. So he thought, what am I going to do with this? Let's take this great barley and turn it into something even more worthwhile, which was whiskey. There was a lot of illicit whiskey makers around that time, but he went one stage further and bought his very expensive license in 1812. Very rarely done, but it was a testament, I think, to the quality he knew he had of the whiskey. But the problem was, he said he couldn't sell it within 120 miles of the distillery. See, Che heading off there, wherever you are, great to have you on. I'm sure you can catch up on the recording later, but he said, I'm having trouble in Parliament. He said, he was a real big campaigner actually for reducing the price of getting your license, because he knew although he could afford it, so many were struggling to get the license. And it was actually causing him problems, legally selling his whiskey within the area. So he campaigned a lot for bringing the license price down. But in the meantime, being up at Nairn, again, a coastal town, he was able to send a lot of his whiskey by sea down to England as well. And the merchant king, I think he was nicknamed as, was it King William IV, became a huge fan of Royal Brackla, so much so, he said, this whiskey is the drink divine. It shall hereby be known as the king's own whiskey, which didn't do Royal Brackla any harm. And he also, a couple of years later, in 1833, granted it the first royal warrant with the right to use the word royal in its distillery name. Only 3 distilleries across the history of Scotch whisky have been granted the right to use the word royal in their distillery name. There's more bonus points coming on now, guys. So anybody who knows, again, pop them in the chat box. Only 2 other distilleries have had the word royal in their name. So not Chivas Regal. There we go. Oh, Greg, you're too fast here. I see you laughing away there. So good. And you even got the trickier one there. Most people get Royal Lochnagar, of course, today owned by Diageo and still up and running. One of the kind of hidden gems, again, a great bottle if you can get hold of it now, was Glenurry Royal. Again, closed down in I want to say early to mid 80s, like 84, 85, something like that. Again, kind of one of the closings there with the whiskey loch that had developed and the boom and bust, which we went through there. But of course, it wasn't a prefix, the Royal, it was a suffix, came after. So that catches a lot of people out with the Glenurry Royal. So just outside of Aberdeen and sort of Stonehaven way there. So great knowledge from yourself there, Greg. But it could be the Glenlivet because the King George IV did grant, exactly. So it didn't grant, the Glenlivet didn't get its license till 1824 after the change in license in 1823. So we were way before that, which I always think is quite an interesting one, but under the previous license, one of the previous licenses, and a very expensive license for that one as well. Again, it didn't do us any harm, as I say, being known as the King's favourite. And someone else who's a really prominent figure in the history of whiskey took a liking to us as well. He is accoladed as the kind of first master blender. There's a big building which he established, a very famous music hall in Edinburgh, which was funded by him as well. If this is ringing any bells. His original blended whiskey, kind of the first kind of large scale commercial blend for sale, was OVG, which stood for Old Vatted Glenlivet. And it was a man called Andrew Usher So Andrew Usher II, actually, because his father was also Andrew Usher. As I say, he became a very big fan of Royal Bracklin. In fact, I mentioned the first ever, kind of accolade as the first ever official blend, to be sold, kind of widely marketed, widely kind of consistent blend in the world of Scotch whisky was that OVG. And it was said to have 4 parts to it. One was Royal Brackla, which was called out, the only distillery really to be called out by name. One of the others was whiskey from the Glenlivet, but the Glenlivet area, so not necessarily the Glenlivet as we know it today, George Smith's Glenlivet, and the other whiskey from Edinburgh, both a grain and a single malt from Edinburgh there as well. So called out by name, as I say, in OBG. It really, you can't tell the story of Scotch whisky for me without mentioning the story of Royal Bracklin. They go really hand in hand, kind of for being one of the first legal licenses, getting, royalty, kind of involved with whisky as well, getting the first royal warrant with the right to use the word royal in your name, the first kind of recognised blend across the history of whisky. Royal Bracklin has just gone from strength to strength, but again, always historically a prominent figure within the world of blended whiskey. And only recently, 2014, with the last great malts, we started to see it bottled as a standard, as a single malt across the range. But there were a lot of great independent bottlings before that. Greg, I think a question.
Yeah, sorry, I did put this in the chat earlier on. When I did my trip in 2018, there was a possibility to visit, but it was exceptional for me as a whiskey blogger, etc. But there were nothing, no shop, no visitor center. Have you planned to do a visitor center for the audience, or is it still a filler? Sorry for the term.
No, not at all. I mean, there's always chat. If it did happen, I don't think it'll be any time soon. And it's one of the only distillery we have at the moment with a visitor centre, kind of for commercial visitors, is Aberfeldy. And the others are closed at the moment.
Oh, even Craigellachie?
Even Craigellachie.
Oh, man.
Craigellachie is not an easy one to tour. And honestly, Aberfeldy is beautiful. It's the perfect layout from beginning to end. You move from one room to the next, and it's the perfect flow, and you go to the other end. It's great to get visitors through. In my old job as distillery, kind of special kind of visits for our distilleries, I used to take special groups around Craigellachie. It's an absolute nightmare. It's like a Mad Hatter's tea party in there. You're back up and down. You're kind of all over the place. So I think it would never be a big kind of commercially kind of tourable.
So only Aberfeldy, Matthew?
Only Aberfeldy for now. Royal Bracklin, it's a nice layout. It's pretty remote. I don't know. You always hear rumours, but honestly, there's no plans for the moment. But I'd love to see it happen down the line.
Yeah, me too. And the Devon is Macduff is close to the sea, so it could be a nice sightseeing as well. But you're going to talk about this.
We'll talk about, and it's another it's a really strange distillery. We'll talk about the still setup and things there. That is a Mad Hatter's tea party for sure in the way they do it. But
I'm jealous you went to visit all these 5.
I was very lucky, as I say. We'll come on to talk about Macduff at the end.
Okay, I'll let you.
I think to understand you, I said we really are at the moment. We have been a blended whiskey company, and the single malts fall under something under Bacardi which we call incubation, where we kind of get a bit more free rein to trial things and test things and see what works with the mind of growing the brands. But anything that's described as an incubation, where it really is seen at the infancy stages of what it can do. So hopefully, as we grow the brands over the years, the more of our whiskies you guys drink, the more likely it is to get to see them as a visitor centre. That's all I'll say. So you'll just have to keep drinking that Royal Bracklin.
Matthew, can I ask a question, please?
Of course you can.
I'm a bit of a bottle geek. I love glass bottles. So I'm looking at all the labels in front of me here, and obviously they're all very different. How much of a thought process goes into the different shapes? Do you, because you've obviously got a lot under your umbrella, do you look and you go, well, we can't have that because it's too much like that? And how much thought process goes into it?
Honestly, because I've not been traveling the world as a global brand ambassador for the last year, I've been embedded really in with the brand teams, who make a lot of decisions. There's been a lot of change kind of behind the scenes. You wouldn't believe how many meetings you have and things like that with agencies and with glass specialists, and it's a lot of time and effort. And I think you're very rightly said, you know, we tried to make all of our bottles look a bit different. I think, you know, we want each brand to kind of stand out within its own right. The Devon, as I mentioned, going to supermarkets, had a bit of a facelift as well. And that is one where you'll see that I'll hold the bottle for now. It was this beautiful etched kind of green kind of glass bottle. And it is one that we're having to do away with. A beautiful new bottle, but away from that, that was the most expensive single bottle we produced on one of our cheapest whiskies. So it's one when you say, you know, when you put it like that, it's probably not a very, you know, commercially sensible thing to do. So there's a lot of meetings now, you know, I think the original lot was put out straight, you know, it's a tiny team who launched the kind of last great malts in 2014. They did a phenomenal job, but now that we're kind of starting an incubation to grow it, there's a lot more thought kind of going into how we deal with this for kind of the long term. So I think that's one example of thinking about changes and what needs to be done for kind of where you want to put that whiskey and think about it in the kind of portfolio play as well. But it's not the most fun part of my day, I'll say. You know, no one goes, oh great, it's another meeting about bottles, you know, but it's it's still an important part for sure.
I think I'd love that. Sounds like my idea of heaven.
Yeah.
I'm pleased to say I don't have to do too much with it. We have someone who's kind of our innovation manager. She does a phenomenal job, and it must be one of the hardest jobs. So much sourcing, and there's a lot to think about with bottle labels, and different countries have to have loads of different labels for different things. I'm glad I don't have to do too much with that.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Great question, not at all. But any other questions for now? I think I saw a Royal Bracklaw as the anniversary of the wedding bottle, the 35-year-old. Yeah, that was for the 200th anniversary of Royal Bracklaw. They released the 35-year-old. It was a very limited bottling. I can't remember off the top of my head how many it was, but it was maybe under the 100 mark, something like that. But I think it was several. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head now. It's in the thousands of pounds for one of those bottles. It is in our shop, Dewars. I think we have one bottle for sale through Aberfeldy. The rest was for duty free as a travel retail kind of exclusive, other than our Aberfeldy shop there. So yeah, if someone's on that website now, they can look it up and they can let us know. But it was, yeah, it's sitting in, that is the only bottle for sale. It still is in the window as you come in at the door, but it is a very, very ornate bespoke bottle. I think it's like you know, crystal, all sorts. It's a very fancy decanter, but yeah, one you might not open too quickly. But great questions and great chat. Again, keeping an eye on time here, I do blether on. Hopefully that was enough of a fill to give you a little bit of history around Royal Bracklaw, a little bit of a look into, as I say, definitely one to watch from us, I think, in the coming years. We're really starting to do a lot of cool things with that. That old Royal Bracklaw, as I say, is going to be disappearing pretty fast. So if you like that as a 12, I think it's an absolute cracker. As I say, I think it does work really well at 40% before we make the move. But now is pretty much your last chance to get one of those. But heading on, we've gone from the oldest distillery in our portfolio, built in 1812, to now the youngest, and we're going to one of the more modern distilleries built in 1960. So I know, Greg, you had a lovely collection there, and I know you've got the 12 and the 18. I love the 12, but I will say the 18 is one of my all-time favourite whiskies, and if you've had a taste of it, you'll know exactly why. Again, I think the price point for the 18 is something like £65 or something ridiculous. We call it our hot tub whiskey in our team, because occasionally we get to go up to Aberfeldy. The accommodation we stay at has these lovely old wooden hot tubs out the back, and the whole malts team, at the end of a hard day's meeting, we're usually sitting in a hot tub drinking a Devon 18. That is the team's absolute go-to, as I say, for that kind of late hour in the night. But the Devon 12, again, as I say, it's a lovely bottle for now, and it really is a very cool design. You can imagine this washing up on a beach, can't you? And it's got the plimsoll line again on there, which ships use to tell you how much cargo they have in them. So it's a very kind of maritime, kind of seaside association with this whiskey here. And that is because it is made at Macduff Distillery in the town of Macduff. Now, the first question you're going to probably say is, all your other whiskies, the village they're from is the distillery name. What's going on here? Why is this not called Macduff whiskey? When Macduff was built in 1960, there was another whiskey brand that had a fairly similar name. I think it was what was it called? McLean Macduff or something like that, I think, who was a subsidiary later on of the DCL. And again, it was against kind of the trading for that. The distillery company name, actually, they operated under the Glen Distillers Limited, because it's the Glen that runs right past the distillery. That's the body of water that runs past us. So the obvious name was the Devon. You will also maybe have seen some Glendeverns. So that was launched before the Devon, a couple of years before we launched the Last Great Malts kind of group in the new bottlings which we have. And that was a travel retail exclusive as well for that. Yep.
Sorry, Matt, a thing I don't understand since the rebranding, and you're talking about it, is why I still see some Glendevern.
So
bottles,
anything for duty free, so travel
okay.
retail,
So
is our
Glendevern
range,
retail.
and that's kind of our higher age statement. So we go.
Okay, thanks.
16,
Let's make it clear.
21. We had a 30, but it's moved to 28 at the moment. So that is kind of travel retail, and you find that all over the world in travel retail. But for some domestic markets, and it's only a few really, France is a big one for us.
Yeah, I have a 15 years old.
Yeah, you've seen some cool things there. We have the Devon. So anything for domestic market, we'd kind of call it, amongst our teams is the Devon. Bang for your buck, as I say, I think this is hard to beat. It is an absolutely cracking, big fruity whiskey, really easy going. This is not one to maybe sit and analyze in a whiskey club. It's one of our stillmen said it's the sort of one when you take the cork out, you may as well throw it in the fire, because that bottle's getting handed around the group and it's going to be empty by the time it gets back, sort of thing. I think it's a very sessionable, easy to enjoy dram. Apples, that's why I get really big kind of ripe apples coming through from this. I'm seeing in the chat here, yeah, apples, someone, great. Not just me, I'm pleased when someone, Andy there, you said it before me, which is always great. Lovely big kind of apples coming through there as well. Almost an artificial, it is kind of a sweet kind of apple note for sure. Wine gum, love that tasting note as well. Definitely wine gums on there as well. Little spice there as well. And I think someone's saying, yeah, kind of silky, little kind of saltiness. There's something a bit different there. Someone said, again, a little waxy. Again, I think that was an Alan's note. And I think that's a really interesting note, because we have such an unusual still setup where we have 2 wash stills, 3 spirit stills, very kind of unbalanced system, but our wash stills have 90-degree kinks coming around in the line arm as it comes off the still. I've not got them just now. If you Google like Macduff stills or Macduff still house, pictures will come up. I definitely encourage you to do it. You'll see these really weird angles, and it's a very short, as I say, one of them has like a long kind of bend into a 90-degree kink into a vertical shell and tube condenser. The other wash still of the 2 has 2 90-degree angles kinked around, very short space, very unusual, really, really strange looking. But then even weirder, our spirit stills, we've got 3, but you see it goes up into this very kind of short, again, line arm off the top of the still. And then we have horizontal shell and tube condensers. So normally you'd expect a shell and tube condenser to be vertical. We are, I think, one of only 3 distilleries in Scotland that have horizontal shell and tube condensers. So I think Glenallachie is the other one that has them all. And I think Dalmore has some as well. But I think that is it. So again, having a 2-3 still setup, 90-degree angle kinks, and then horizontal condensers. Very unusual. But what we say is having horizontal shell and tube condensers, if you imagine what a worm tub does, kind of that angle, the amount of kind of copper contact, kind of gravity flow, the way it's kind of moving through, it's allowing a little bit more kind of weight and body to come through to the spirit. So I think Andy said there was about that kind of waxiness. It's kind of a little bit more of a kind of interesting kind of character, an interesting kind of note there, a bit more weight. Everything we do kind of from our kind of fermentation, our kind of first distillation, you're creating this really kind of light, fruity, appley character. And then we add a little bit more weight to it with that kind of second distillation in the horizontal shell and tube condensers. Really, really bizarre distillery. This one I mentioned, built in 1960. We had designs by kind of, again, this new wave of distilling. A lot of people talk about the romance of the 1800s in whiskey. I think the 1960s onwards is this other kind of really interesting point. It's post-World War. We see the end of the 1958 grain rationing. So we start to see distilleries starting up again. And we start to see a few new distilleries being built. We reckon this was the third or fourth distillery to be built after the Second World War, was the Macduff. And with the World War, we have lots of industrial revolutions, lots of new inventions, war efforts on kind of machinery, and we start to see some of those being implemented in distilling as well. So gravity flow systems coming into distilleries, lagging of stills. We're one of the first distilleries to be designed without a maltings, because by this point you had commercial maltsters up and running. So the question was asked, do we actually need to build a maltings on site? And the answer was no. So I think everything they did with Macduff was asking the question, what do we actually need to make really good quality whiskey at a really good volume and affordable price? I think that's exactly what you get. And I always say Macduff and whiskey from Macduff or the Devon, it's whiskey for the people. It's kind of trying to get really good whiskey at a really affordable price point. And a lot of that was thanks to those kind of revolutions that they had inside the distillery. Again, Corton steel, I think it was in the mash tun, stainless steel washbacks coming in, a lot of really interesting kind of notes coming through. But I love that kind of appley, kind of waxy note. Say bang for your buck. I think Devon is unbeatable within our portfolio and amongst a lot of other whiskies in Scotland. As I say, it was around that kind of, say, a little bit less than Aberfeldy price point. I think it's going to be hopefully even a little bit more affordable now that it's going into the sort of supermarkets as well. So one to watch next time you're going down the aisle in your local supermarket. But yeah, great whiskey for me, but really interesting time. The architect was a man called William Delm Evans. So again, he was kind of French-Welsh as well, grew up in, I think originally from family from France, but grew up in Wales. And he had, I think, 6 distilleries to his name. So probably the next closest to, what's his name? Charles Creedoig that we were talking about. But he didn't put his name to Macduff Distillery. It's also worth noting, I think he had a fallout with his business partners along the way. So it's not officially noted as being one of his distilleries, but we are 99% sure it was his plans. Again, because it was Brodie Hepburn was one of his business partners from Tullybarden, again, who also used him for the design there. But I'd love to get your thoughts on this one. Again, if it's a more, very affordable in France, you said there, Greg. Yeah, great. A little soapy, that's an interesting note. I'd love to expand on that one more as well. And texture in the palate, quite just bubbles away a little bit. I think there's some kind of like a little bit of citrus in there as well. Would you say kind of like, for me, like a pink kind of grapefruit, that kind of, a little bit of kind of zest, kind of a little bit of citrus, kind of tartness in there as well, which I think is one of the things that gives it that kind of really interesting note. Cracking dram. Orange, totally big kind of zesty notes in there for me for sure, kind of citrus zest. An unsugared sorbet, I love that one as well. Some great tasting notes. But again, what are the thoughts on that? Thumbs up if you're a big fan of that one. So that's all right.
I really enjoy this one. I must admit, I've looked at this many a time because, like the bottle.
Yeah,
like I said, I'm a bit of a bottle whore.
And it is a shame. Don't get me wrong. I think that they're doing away with, I think, a more affordable bottle. Let's be honest. If you're going to try to put this at a better price point in the supermarket, you can't have your most expensive bottle to produce and your cheapest to sell whiskey.
How different is the bottle in general?
It's going to be clear. So again, that was for us, we're trying to be more environmental. It's definitely something that, we think about in whiskey. We're not perfect yet. We definitely know that, but we're trying to be more and more in line as we can. Bacardi's made a lot of big pledges as a company, and that was not I'd say that bottle had to go to several different places to be produced. Again, with the etching, you had to give it a secondary kind of outer packaging so it didn't scuff in the packaging. There was a lot of extra stuff with it. So we thought, in this day and age, it is a shame, but I think we want to bring it down in a more affordable kind of price point. But also, from environmental reasons, we thought it's not the best. But so again, if you like that bottle, you better get hold of it soon, because that already kind of has gone in the last few weeks. It should be popping up in some of your supermarkets. But stunning design, and it's one we're all fans of. We would have loved to have kept if we can. But I think the new design, again, it's a really kind of clean cut, clear glass kind of bottle, but the outer box it comes in as well, lovely kind of bold geometric shapes. I think it's it looks more like a kind of punk beer kind of look. It'll really stand out on shelf. But I think it gets across that we're trying to be a progressive whiskey. And I think, since the Devon was built by the four businessmen that built it, to be clear, it was built by four very entrepreneurial businessmen. One was Brodie Hepburn, so already very well renowned within the whiskey industry. One of the other, they're all Glasgow businessmen. One of the others was a builder who helped build the distillery, again had a building firm. One of the other ones was a lawyer, so helped them with all the legalities. And the other one was a whiskey broker, so helped them sell it. So they had literally the dream team of Glasgow businessmen to get that one up and going. And that was really, as I say, from the word go, it was trying to be really, an affordable one to sell as single malt. Italy was a big market early on for them, and also for blends. That is the heart of William Lawson. We talked about, William Lawson's been this huge whiskey in Russia. If Aberfeldy is the heart malt for Dewars as a blend, Macduff, whiskey from Macduff is the heart malt of, the blend for William Lawson's, which is an absolutely massive whiskey. So I think, we say no rules, great Scotch is the tagline for William Lawson's as the blend. I think it is just great Scotch whiskey for all should be what we're saying for the Devon. It's just getting out into people's hands. It's a progressive whiskey. Was there a question there? Was it Greg?
Yeah, does it mean every of the 5 brands you have at Bacardi, the parent company, are going to be rebranded now? Not only Royal Buckler?
Not all of them. And it's one, if you look at it over the years, we've been slowly, since the 2014 kind of...
Yeah, because it's very recent.
Aberfeldy, remember, as I say, it was a tiny team. They have to do a lot across 5 brands and get them out there quite quickly. We're now kind of, Aberfeldy is our lead malt, but we're now starting to look at the other 4 thinking, is this working for us, or what should we be doing? What's the feedback we're getting on these? What do our fans want? So,
to say I will regret this. I know it's heavy and expensive, but I will regret this because it's very old school for me. When I see auctions and when I investigate on history of whiskey, I see a lot of this kind of things. Bottles, but so I understand if you want to collect them, we have to buy them now, right?
Exactly.
Okay,
you're doing my job for me here, Greg. But that is the Devon, and we're now on to our final whiskey of the evening. But I should say, is there any questions? Sorry, before we do move on to that, was there any other questions on the Devon? We're quite happy. Quite happy. You're ready for this last whiskey now, I can tell. So, as I say, I'm not saying I've saved the best to last, but I'm unbelievably biased because this is my hometown, Craigellachie. This is a bit of home pride coming through here. This is personally my go-to whiskey. It's usually what's in my glass at a party. Craigellachie 13. I think one of the best whiskies ever made. I will say it's not to everybody's taste. We don't have a peaty whiskey as such, but if we have anything that's at all close to it, it's what you're about to taste now. And it is a very unusual Speyside whiskey. Some of the writers and whiskey bloggers nicknamed us the bad boy of Speyside for Craigellachie, because we didn't do things in the normal kind of Speyside way with our age statements for a start. We don't have a 10 or a 12, we have a 13-year-old. Then we don't have a 15 or an 18-year-old, we have a 17-year-old. And then we move up to a 23, and we had a 19 for a while as a travel retail exclusive. Then up to a 31, and then it was up to a 51, which was our oldest ever bottle. So anybody who's a mathematician here or good with maths, you might notice we have prime numbers for the kind of the majority of our original range anyway, which just happened to be sweet spots, in all honesty, to begin with, and kind of the points that our malt master was pulling the whiskey out and thought, this is really good. And then it became a bit of a running joke. Just we were a bit stubborn. We did things our own way. I think prime numbers kind of fitted into that. But for me, it fits into the kind of Craigellachie character. As I tell you a little bit about the history, I really would love to get some of your tasting notes off the back of this one, because it's a little bit funky. I think it's a little bit unusual. It's not the clean-cut Speyside character you expect. There's something just a little bit different there. And once you've had a smell and a taste, I definitely encourage you to add just a drop or two of whiskey, of water to the whiskey there. And it's really going to help to open up. Again, this is at 46% ABV. It's natural colour. It's non-chill filtered. It is a special, special dram. Craigellachie was built in 1891. And in fact, people say Craigellachie has been old-fashioned since 1891. So it's a bit of a joke us saying that, because as I say, we were built in 1891. So what we're really saying is we have always been considered old-fashioned. And it was, again, another really famous whiskey writer, a man called Alfred Bernard, who wrote this great volume called Whiskey Distilleries of the United Kingdom. I don't encourage any of you to run out and buy that book and read it cover to cover. It's a very dry read, but it basically, the first kind of whiskey blogger. Oh, there we go. Greg's got a copy there. Show them the side of it, show them how thick it is. There it is in the back. And if you show them the page, the text size, it's very, very small text, old school style writing on the pages there. Very, as I say, it's not the most interesting read. But what Alfred Bernard did was write down his thoughts on visiting distilleries, and it was kind of that first account for someone to visit. Yeah, lovely. There's a lot of great images. That came later. That edition will actually have, he didn't write about Craigellachie in the original book, but Craigellachie is featured in that edition, I believe. I think that's like the 2008 one or something like that, is it? Because he wrote a paper on it later on and it was added to that publication. But you'll see there, Greg, if you look at that book, he talks about his visit to Craigellachie. And he said, basically they've just built this distillery, but they've chosen to use very old-fashioned production methods. And he said, it's a style seldom met. He's referring to even back then in 1891, it was a style of whiskey seldom met with today. And he referenced the old Glenlivet style. Now, bear in mind, this is not the Glenlivet, the single malt you know today, but the area of Glenlivet, which was kind of like almost synonymous with what we now know as Speyside, kind of as that region. And it was getting some of those big pineapple kind of tropical notes coming through. And that's one thing for me you get with the nose here. It's kind of a tropical note to it. And pineapple's definitely a big note for me here. And it's great to hear that was called out in, we reckon, 1893 when Alfred Bernard visited the distillery. So just a couple of years after it was built, because he makes reference to the hotel, which we know was just built then as well. But there was something a bit unusual in there as well. And if you've added a bit of water, you're probably getting this funky, musty, cordite, wet gunpowder, as I say, sulfury, kind of unusual note, kind of alongside that typical kind of Speyside character. There's almost a meatiness to it as well, right? And if I say that, kind of a meatiness, someone once said it's a bit like putting a pineapple in your gammon steak. It's kind of this juxtaposition, these really unusual kind of flavor camps sitting side by side. Our US brand ambassador, this amazing character called Gabe Gardarella II, he's an absolute legend. He said, I'm not going to do the American accent, you'll just have to imagine, but he said, for me, it's like firing a shotgun through a pineapple. And I think that is such a visual tasting note. It puts a smile on your face, right? You can imagine yourself doing this, very visual. But I think that beautifully encapsulates the two sides of Craigellachie. On one side, you have he's firing it through a pineapple. You have that very typical Speyside, big fruity kind of tropical note coming through. But he said firing a shotgun, because you have that lovely kind of slightly smoky, but not in a TCP medicinal kind of Isla smokiness. It's more in that, as I say, kind of cordite, kind of wet gunpowdery kind of note. Yeah, someone's saying, yeah, dirtyish. Yeah, it is kind of a really kind of meaty, kind of musty, kind of funky note in there at the end. Charred wood. Yeah, for me, there's a lovely kind of burnt kind of note to this as well. And I always say toasted pineapple. It's not kind of dry, ripe pineapple. It's kind of that toasted note. For me, again, across the whole Craigellachie range, it's banana. But at the 13, you have this kind of underripe kind of almost green banana. It's quite an interesting kind of note to it. But if you try the 17 or the 23 all the way up to the 31, you just see the banana developing. By the time you get to the 31, it's like banana bread. It's really kind of overdone kind of black bananas, and with these lovely kind of rich cereal notes. A lot of cereal notes in there for me as well. Yeah, kind of dirty tropical kind of note. I feel a t-shirt coming on. Brilliant. I actually just did, it was the Our Whiskey Festival with Becky Paxton, great whiskey writer, did this wonderful festival, and it was called Club Tropicana. It was kind of secretive tasting. You didn't know what the notes were, and I had to have my Hawaiian shirt on, my sunglasses, and I had a photoshopped Craigellachie distillery with lovely big kind of pineapple trees out the front. So it's one you can definitely have some fun with. I'd love to see some t-shirts for maybe another tasting. If we do another one down the line, that'd be great. This one makes me happy, Frank's saying as well. it's just such a great whiskey. Really interesting, very unusual Speyside. The reason it's unusual, right, I should probably talk a little bit about some of the how we do that. Two things, if you're going to only remember two things about Craigellachie from the production side of things, the first is our barley, our malted barley. We don't malt barley on site. Again, that stopped for us in 1968, I think. We use a commercial maltster out at Montrose called Glen Esk. Now, Glen Esk have 4 different kind of kilns for drying. We have, at the moment, exclusive use of their kiln number 2. And kiln number 2 is what's known as an oil-fired kiln. So most kilns today, they blast it through with hot air. You know, there's no direct firing into a kiln. Even a lot of peaty whiskey, they're drying it down with hot air, and then indirectly, you know, they're burning peat and then putting that through kind of with the smoke. We have a direct firing underneath, as I say, and it's a HFO we're using. So you get these massive big licks of sulphur coming up into the barley. And I'll never forget him. You can't normally visit Glen Esk, but myself and my predecessor, Georgie Bell, who was in the global role, we were lucky enough to organise a trip out to see our maltster. And I arrived at the malt things, bearing in mind they don't normally have tours. And the first man I met, I said, "Oh, excuse me, we're here, we're meeting the manager." And he says, "Oh, are you the guys from Craigellachie?" And I said, "Yes." And he just said, "Oh, you guys are weird." And he walked off. And that was literally my greeting at Glen Esk. Then I caught up with this guy later in the tour, and I said, "What on earth did you mean by that?" And he said, "You know, I've worked in maltings for over 20 years. I have never seen a request for barley quite like Craigellachie's." And we got chatting on it with the whole malts team there. And he said, you know, most maltsters are looking to have as low a trace level of sulphur as possible. You know, that's the kind of requirements from the distilleries. If it's above kind of like 3 parts per million, it's rejected by most distilleries. He said, you guys at Craigellachie are looking for like 10 times that as your ask. You know, that is very, very rare. And again, most distillers throughout the process at the distillery, they're trying to lose as much of the sulphury kind of notes as they can. Craigellachie, we're trying to keep those in. We have huge stills, big fat bases on them, big tall necks. Someone once said they look like they've had too many Happy Meals. You know, they're one of those kind of stills, huge, big monster of a base and big tall neck on them. And then they go along this really kind of flat horizontal line arm. And where you'd expect to see that shell and tube condenser, it just goes straight through a hole in the wall and it goes out to our worm tubs. So we're one of now only 19 distilleries in Scotland using the old-fashioned kind of condensing method, the worm tub. And again, just like we say it how we see it in Scotland, someone said, you know, why is it called a worm tub? Well, you have this big snaking worm coil, again, our serpent coil it was known as. Greg's got a picture there of our distillery. Again, it's a fairly new front distillery. You've got a lovely old pagoda on what was the old maltings. But again, that expansion under the DCL in the late 60s, early 70s, that lovely big kind of roller windows for the still houses there as well. But yeah, we do everything again we can. With the worm tubs, you're getting less interaction with the copper, although it's a huge big space. We run them quite cold, so you're getting a kind of layer of film develops in the worm, buffering the spirit from a lot of the copper interaction. So we have quite a lot of that kind of sulfur makes its way into our new make spirit, and it's one of those where if you were to nose our new make spirit, you get massive big notes of sulfur coming through. And our malt master Stephanie said, you know, you'd nose it and think, how on earth do you get tropical fruits from this? But if you're to run it through the kind of analysis and the machines behind the scenes as well, you know, we have a spectrometer, whatever it is, I forget the name. And we run it through the computer labs as well. It would have the biggest potential for fruity compounds. So for me, maturing Craigellachie, it's just allowing some of those big, lovely sulfury notes to slowly dissipate. And you end up with this balance of kind of sulfur and tropical fruits, which I think is what makes Craigellachie. Filthy dirty from Tom there as well. I hope you're talking about the whiskey still here, Tom. Dirty's nice now and again. 5 great drams, glad to hear it. You'll hopefully now understand why we did the running order in the way we did. We had to finish with Craigellachie from a taste perspective, if nothing else alone. But yeah, a cracking dram, I think, to finish up with there. Craigellachie, as I mentioned, 2 founders. You have Alexander Edward, who we've already talked about with Altmore, and then you had his business partner, Peter Mackey, who was the yin to Alexander Edward's yang. He was a very different man, always fighting government for minimum aging, pricing restrictions from the government. He didn't get on with them very much at all, very outspoken. The founding father of Whitehorse. He was known, if you've watched The Angel's Share, have many of you watched that movie, The Angel's Share? You know, the one, the kind of hidden gem, it's Malt Mill. That's the bottle that goes up for auction, the cask that they get in the Iron Brew bottles and smash and all that. That was Malt Mill, which was this hidden gem. And that was built by Peter Mackey. And it was in protest because he fell out with the guys at Lafroig. And basically, Lafroig changed ownership and wouldn't give him the whiskey he wanted. And he owned Lagavulin next door. So he cut their water supply, used the water supply for Lafroig. He said to the workers at Lafroig, I'm going to build a distillery. If you come to it, I'll pay you more money to work for me. So loads of the staff jumped over and he copied the plans and basically built a Lafroig 2. So that's the sort of guy he was, not someone you want to mess with, you know, a really kind of proactive businessman, shall we say. But yeah, really interesting character. He was described by, again, another famous whiskey writer, Sir Robert Bruce Lockhart, who was one of his friends. He described Peter Mackey as 1/3 eccentric, 1/3 genius, and 1/3 just a megalomaniac. He was a real character within Scotch whisky. But as I say, him alongside Alexander Edward, they balanced each other out beautifully. So for me, you've got these really two kind of contrasting characters within our founders. For me, that summarizes the taste profile again beautifully. It's these kind of contradiction in a glass, I think, with Craigellachie. These really, you know, if someone didn't have Craigellachie in front of them and you said it's like putting a pineapple on a gammon steak, they'd think, oh, that sounds pretty unusual, right? But hopefully you guys will agree it's a rather nice combination. Pretty unusual is a Speyside whiskey. Any thoughts on the Craigellachie? I think the chat box went wild from seeing that one. I think lots of agreement there with it being quite a dirty, funky, unusual dram. That kind of filthy popped up a few times. It is a rather unusual Speyside whiskey. Brilliant. Again, thumbs up. Did we like that one? I won't be offended. Thumbs down if you didn't like that one, because it is kind of a Marmite for a lot of people. Is there anyone? Yeah, it's kind of a love-hate for some people. It's yeah, double thumbs up from a lot of you. So I think that might have been a good favourite from some of you across the evening there. It's definitely a go-to dram for me. I think it's about, again, around the sort of £48 thereabouts, just under the sort of £50 mark. It's kind of the normal for Craigellachie 13. But again, I think it's not a bad price for what it is.
So Matthew, we've enjoyed I think the progression that you've presented us with has been really good. If you could pick these in an order of your preference, though, what would it be?
It honestly would be really hard to do, because I think, like I'm sure everyone says, it depends on the time and the place and the occasion, right? I think Craigellachie is my go-to personally. Again, it's home pride. It's what, before I worked for the company, it was always a favourite in the village, and that's why I jumped to the chance to get to represent home in this role. So, that has to be it for me. The fact you're recording this and the guys from home from the distillery might see it. If I said anything else, I'd be kicked out of the village. I'd never be allowed back again, right? But
you don't need to lose your job.
It's so tough, because I think, just honestly, as a go-to, just if pals are around, you're wanting something that is just a good go-to dram, everybody's going to enjoy. For this hot weather we're having, I love a highball, something just to mix in, or, an apple highball, I've been calling it, a few chunks of Granny Smith green apple in there, build it up with a little soda top and a little bit of apple juice, and then Devon 12. And that is an absolutely cracking, really refreshing go-to summer drink. On a hot summer's day, that would be hard to beat for me, but just a great go-to dram. Aberfeldy, though, I think is the one that you just know. I've never met anyone that doesn't like Aberfeldy, right? And I think it's just that easygoing. I'm saying Tom, not maybe for Tom, but for others, very rare. I'll say that anyway. I guess unless you like some, big. I'm guessing you like higher ABV, maybe, Tom. Do you? Is that one? Yeah. So, fair enough there. It might not be your total preference, but I wouldn't say most people don't dislike it, but it maybe isn't a favourite. I'll say that for now. But
it's not the ABV. It's probably just a bit too sweet for me. That's all the Aberfeldy.
It definitely is sweet. I'll give you that for sure as well. But I think that is a safe go-to. But I've showed you again, Altmore, Royal Brackla. I think Altmore is that hidden gem. I think that's something. Yes. Altmore's the one for me. If I've got mates around who know a lot about whiskey and they've had, majority of whiskies, you know, in at pubs, have been in whiskey for years. I say, have you tried Altmore? And most of them will say no, because it is that hidden gem. And you say, try Altmore, and it usually comes out as that kind of new, I'm definitely getting a bottle of that. You know, I think for folk who are into whiskey, Altmore is that little hidden gem, you know, a little bit higher ABV, stuff like that. But as I say, I love the old Royal Bracla, but the new range of Royal Bracla is up there now with my, you know, all-time. The Palo Cortado, the 18, I think is the one. If you're going to, you know, have a look, if you ever see it in a bar or whatever, you get a chance to try any Royal Bracla, the 18 Palo Cortado is wonderful. It is like a zingy menthol freshness alongside this damp kind of musty sherry note. It is just weird and wonderful. It is such a great dram to try. But yeah, hard to choose a favorite. I will say, you know, this might be one for you, Tom, and if you haven't already, one for the raffle. I know that they're going to be having. And you're saying on new favourites, I love what Aberfeldy has been doing with its exceptional casks. And if you weren't a fan of the core range, Tom, I think this is where it's moving for you, where we start to look at higher ABV. So I know you have for the raffle the Aberfeldy 15. Where we've gone into our wine cask series now. This is up at 43%. Again, for those who are saying, I'd like to see an Aberfeldy at 43%. You have it here. And again, we're taking the casks. It's initially matured in ex-bourbon casks. And then we're finishing it off for a period. I think this one was 5 months. I think it was a little bit less because it was quite a predominant cask. Was in Pomerol. So Pomerol is your Bordeaux kind of wine. We've done now, the first year we did a wine cask, and that wasn't this year. It must have been 2019. We released the 15-year-old as our first kind of in what will be a series of French wine cask finishes for Aberfeldy. And if you kind of think of the two banks of Bordeaux, if you're into your wine, you have the left bank and right bank. Is always quite a good way to think about it. The left bank, because of its location, again, being closer to the sea, it's earlier ripening, and you get these lovely big tannic kind of wines like Pauillac, which is what we have with the 18-year-old that was released. I'm seeing Greg saying, yeah, phenomenal. You think of some of the best collectible wines now, you think, you know, Pauillac is a great area to go, all the Mouton Rothschild and all those kind of ones. This is the right bank, though, the other side of things. Pomerol is, again, inland. It's these lovely, earlier ripening, again, big juicy fruits. You were talking about wine gums. Someone, I think, said that. I think it was maybe Andy for Aberfeldy. This is juicy fruit wine gums for me with the 15-year-old. And it is just big, bold, juicy fruits. And it's a sort of whiskey, if it's the last one you had before bed, you'd still wake up tasting it tomorrow morning. It just coats the palate. One of my new favourites for Aberfeldy. I'm torn between this and the 18 because I quite like kind of big tannic things. So the 18 I think is phenomenal for that. But this one just was so different for Aberfeldy. Big, massive kind of juicy fruits. Wine gums definitely would be the descriptor for this one there. But that one's getting hard to get hold of, as I say, because we did it as a bigger batch of the 15 than we have for the 18. I think the 18 has now officially sold out because it was a smaller batch. We might have some 15s kicking about, but again, very limited just now. But that was one we wanted to give you guys a wee tasting of. I will say there's about to be another bottle released in that wine cast series in the next few months. I will be shocked if I tell you what it is at the moment, especially as a recorded Zoom. But yeah, keep an eye out for it because it's definitely one to watch. I will say, I think you might be able to see my full name, if not on my name on the Zoom there. So it's Malt Matt. So at Malt Matt. Malt Matt is my Instagram. If you follow me there, or Facebook, I'm Matthew Cordiner, so you can see is my name spelled there, and then BA after my name. Someone said, "Oh, you're very fancy putting your degree title there." I said, "No, it's brand ambassador." So I have a personal Facebook and I have a whiskey one because I didn't want to bore my family with lots of whiskey chat. They get enough of that from me when they see me anyway. So I tried to keep them separate. But yeah, follow me on any of those. As I say, we'll keep you up to date with what's going on with the new releases and things as well. You guys have been an absolute pleasure to talk to as well. So I will say, if you did want to buy anything at all on our website, which is shop.dewars.com, which is kind of our web shop based out of the Aberfeldy distillery, because it's the only one, as we mentioned, as a visitor centre and kind of an operations centre. If you use Matt's Mates, M-A-T-T-S, Matt's Mates, M-A-T-E-S, you'll get 10% off anything in shop. for that as well. But just as a thanks for listening to me for the last hour and a bit.
Thank you, Matthew. Well. That's awesome.
Pleasure.
You've done, I mean, I just want to say a massive thank you, to be honest, because I think Lee contacted you originally for us, and you were one of the first people to get back to us with regards to the charity. So you had no idea who we were, what we were doing, and to give us, what was it, 6 bottles?
So generous.
Yeah, it was just amazing, to be honest. It kind of spurred us on to think that this was something that we could do. Yeah. So you've got more of a part in this than you probably know, to be honest.
Honestly, my pleasure. And as soon as a great cause as well. So as soon as I heard what it was for, always happy to help out with charity events and stuff. But
awesome.
No, as I say, thanks again, Lee. It was great, as I say, the original reach out there and then to pick up with yourselves. It's been an absolute pleasure, guys. Honestly, really enjoyed it, and thank you so much for great input. It's always one of these things you never know, and especially on a Sunday evening after a good day of football and a few beers, and the beginning of a Monday morning, the next day, you never know how much chat there's going to be going on in the box. So really appreciate all the input from you all across the night, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
I think I will start us off by saying that this has probably been one of my favourite ones that we've done, to be honest. You come across like you really do enjoy and the brand and are passionate about it. So we can't thank you enough for joining us. I'd like to give you a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Cheers. I still can't believe this counts as a job, to be honest. Growing up in Craigellachie, if someone said, you can get to talk about the village and the whiskey and that counts as a job, I wouldn't have believed you. But I will say, you can't help but be passionate in whiskey. Once you start reading it, history is what really fascinates me. I love drinking whiskey, of course, but history is what fascinates me. And if you do enjoy history, again, I've plugged it a little bit already, but get yourself up to visit Aberfeldy Distillery, because I mentioned I was there for like 4 odd hours. It was we have like a living kind of archive where we work really close with the archivist to get a lot of our archive kind of objects displayed in this room. And it's kind of a replica of Tommy Dewar's kind of office from the early 1900s down in London. But you could spend hours in there, and there's just so much history and things to take in. Every day is a school day in whiskey. And if you think otherwise, you're doing it wrong, right? I'm lucky that I'm surrounded by family and friends who've been in the industry for generations and years, and even guys who've been in the industry for 50 years will say they're still learning something new every day. So I encourage you as much as possible, just get reading and get listening and get on tastings and just speak to each other. It's the best way to learn, right?
And before we go, for people who are going to try and win this bottle of Aberfeldy 15, what could they expect if they did win it from the whiskey?
As I say, it's an absolute treat, I think, for the kind of new direction we were taking Aberfeldy in. And I don't mean that as we have what we call our core range, which will never change. And that, I think, is the backbone, the fundamental, that lovely honeyed note that kind of all the way through Aberfeldy. The job of what we call our exceptional casks, so that is across all 5 of our different single malts, Stephanie McLeod and our team of blenders, if they're nosing through a cask and they find something that's just a bit different, or they think, that's worked really well, rather than putting that in with the other whiskies, within the marrying process for bigger batches of other things, they think, let's just keep that back and see how it develops, or let's try this in some unusual casks just to see how it works. This 15-year-old really was the beginning point for us in what I think will be a whole new kind of series and range. So it is the beginning, definitely the first in what is the series of the kind of French red wine casks. But I think it's a treat if you're an Aberfeldy fan. It is still that honey note of Aberfeldy, but this wonderful just new direction it's kind of gone in with those big juicy fruits, and especially with the kind of wine cask finishing there. But also, if you're not, if you maybe haven't liked the core range of Aberfeldy, like Tom was saying, it's just a totally different Aberfeldy. Still, it's not totally different. It still is clearly Aberfeldy, but just in a very kind of different dimension, I think, for what it is. But definitely one of my new favourites. I go back and forth between that, the 15 and the 18, because they're so different from each other as wine cask finishes, and it's too difficult to pick a favourite. But if you like big, bold wine gums, I think, again, going back to what Andy said, wine gums, it is wine gums in buckets, really interesting.
Yeah. Awesome. So if you fancy winning that and you haven't already bought tickets, you can buy them in the Discord chat now. Just go back through it. You'll see the links. And thank you, Matthew. That's been amazing. It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. Anybody got a question? Anyone got any questions before we let Matthew go? We all done? Yeah. Frank has. Oh, and then he leaves.
Was that the wrong button there? I don't think that was a mute. I think the Tom.
It meant to press the question button.
Was the wrong button. The Royal Brakla, the new lineup. There was a question when it will be released in England, and I noticed someone who was already said, well, it is available via Royal Mile whiskey.
Yeah.
When will it be available in Europe? And in my case, in the Netherlands. Do you know that?
I don't know that yet, and it's one of these. We chose to launch the new Royal Brakla in 2020. What a great time to launch a new global brand, right? So what wasn't quite to plans what we had for the original kind of launch plans. So it has been kind of a bit delayed, and it's one of those where we don't want to put it out to markets where there are a lot of still the old Royal Brakla there, because it'll be very confusing if you have the two sitting kind of side by side on shelf. So in all honesty, it's waiting for a lot of depletions of the old Royal Brakla to kind of move through markets, so that, you know, there might be a little period where both are sitting next to each other, but we don't want them sitting next to each other on shelf for kind of a long period of time. So it originally launched very end of 2020 in Taiwan. That was kind of the first major market to get it. And I did a virtual launch from my own bedroom here in Taiwan, which was great fun. Never thought I could sit here, and it's like 10 a.m. for me or something for them, kind of over there at the time, along with Stephanie, our maltmaster, for there. So it was really interesting. But since the launch in Taiwan, it's slowly being rolled out. Really, one of the first other places to launch has been the UK. I know that Europe is probably down the line, but it won't just be Europe as a whole. I think we really are starting to look at, you know, different countries. I think Germany is about to get the 12 in to begin with. So I don't know if that'll be rolling out maybe just as the 12 again. It's a lot of it's on what we call allocation, because it's still not in huge volumes. So, you know, it might just be the 12 that comes to your market to begin with. But hopefully for Europe, I think it's going to start rolling out over the next year anyway. So hopefully it won't be too long. About the same, I think. As I say, I've not seen any set plans from the markets for those coming in yet. The only one I 100% know is, as I say, I think we're going to have kind of the official launch towards the end of the month in the UK, although some retailers have just kind of started selling it, I think, when their allocations arrived as well. So you can get it on shop.dewars.com, for example. I think the 12's still there. Yeah, I don't actually know if you can get the old Royal Brakla on there now. I think it has sold out through a lot of the UK. So one to watch for. But yeah, sorry, can't be more use than that, but hopefully not too long is the
all about, so thanks.
Yeah, not at all.
Eventually, Frank, eventually.
Yeah, I tried to give an honest answer. It's not a quick answer, mind, with me. As I say, I can blather for Scotland, but hopefully you get a good answer.
On the phone, so thanks.
Not at all.
Okay, guys, that's it, I think.
Was there one more question? I think Tom...
Was there one?
Does he hand up or no?
Oh, go on, Tom, go for it.
Just wanted to say... thanks very much, Matt. It's been fantastic, very passionate. But your discount code sounded like Matt's mate, sounded like your condom collection.
Yeah. cheap and cheerful, that's it, exactly.
But so you said you came back from holiday. Where did you get that sun-kissed look from?
So I was down, more so your neck of the woods, I was down in Wales, just drove back up there from today. So that's I was hoping I was going to get back for the tasting in time. But before that, we're visiting family on the Isle of Wight as well, which was great fun. So not a Scottish sun, as I say, very, very rare to get a good suntan. Although today you might actually have got one. It was quite a good afternoon here, I'll say that. A nice drive up. But no, good. It was a 10-day break, so it's really trying to get my mind back in. It's amazing how after 10 days of switching off and not talking about anything to do with whiskey, you're thinking, was that the right date again? I've said this a million times, so hopefully that came across all right tonight. It wasn't too forgetful.
Perfect. It was perfect.
Cheers, Tom.
Anyone else before we go? Is that it? That's it, Matthew. I think we're all done. We'll let you get on with your evening.
Not at all. My absolute pleasure, guys. And any questions, anytime, as I say, you've got my Instagram, Facebook. Drop us a comment, reach out, anything new to help. But a pleasure, guys, again, really worthy cause and happy to help how I could.
We'll be in touch in a couple of days to sort out the raffle. You can pick a winner and then we'll announce it in the Discord. So thank you again, my friend. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night.
You.
Bye for now.
Thank you and good luck for the, the raffle.